Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, coming to you from the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Inflation debases the weight of your debt. Consider, too, that it debases the value of your equity at the same rate. An approach to having $10 million in debt. Then a great guest joins us to discuss the latest U.S. housing trends today on Get Rich Education. The company that's provided our listeners with more loans than anyone is Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. You can finance more than 10 single families up to fourplexes. Serving most U.S. states, their knowledge and experience leads to your financial freedom. They're number one in the investment space. Pre-qualify and then chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. Start on your next investment property loan right now at ridgelendinggroup.com. Finally, Total Control Financial gives you checkbook control of your 401k and IRA money to invest in real estate. It's time to get your retirement money into your own checking account, but you've got to avoid the little-known tax that you'll pay with any self-directed IRA. Instead, it's time for the QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Here it is. Hey, welcome to GRE, episode 260, from Bethlehem, Palestine to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education, coming to you from the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, on this fine autumn day. The percentage of homes owned free and clear in the U.S., yes, those that are not financed by a mortgage, is increasing. That's according to recent data from Zillow, which revealed that 37% of homes in 2017 were owned free and clear. Yes, there's been a gradual rise of mortgage-free homes since 2006, when the percentage of these homes was just 31.5%. Now it's up to 37%. Well, I can tell you that a lot of these people aren't listening to Get Rich Education, because for most people, that just kills your velocity of money and your rate of return when you have a paid-off home. Now, why would this happen? Why would there be more free and clear homes today than there was back in 2006? Well, Zillow economist Jeff Tucker, he is of the opinion that homeowner demographics are the driving factor behind this trend. He says the biggest factor behind the rise in mortgage-free homes is the aging composition of homeowners. Young people saw their homeownership rates fall the most during and after the real estate crash of 12 years ago, and so the median ages of homeowners, as well as first-time homebuyers, have risen since then. But Tucker, the Zillow economist, he predicts that this trend will level off and gradually reverse because of two major events that are sure to impact the housing market. Number one is that a large number of baby boomers will age out of homeownership. And secondly, a larger number of millennials will become new homeowners, and they're the two largest generations alive today. So for several years, many more home sellers will be established in older households without mortgages, while a growing share will be younger households buying their first homes, of whom the vast majority will take out new mortgages. That's what the Zillow economist said. So now back to my comments. Yeah, I think that sounds fairly accurate. The old school, older people's mentality that it's good to own your home free and clear, I mean, that just displays the lack of financial education in the United States, perhaps. Younger people might hold this generally faulty belief as well. I'd even venture to say that most young people think that free and clear is better, but just not quite as many of those in older generations. Of course, younger people just don't have the financial wherewithal to own a free and clear home like older people do either. But back to the report here, the percentage of free and clear homes by state also shows geographic differences in home prices. States with lower home prices have a greater number of free and clear homes, homes without a mortgage. Okay, so lower price states have more of these free and clear homes. In fact, the top 3 percentage-wise states of free and clear homes are all in low-cost states. West Virginia takes the top slot with 54% of mortgage-free homes, followed by Mississippi at 51%, and then Louisiana at 48%. Now, conversely, the states with the lowest rates of free and clear homes have home price and demographic trends in common. The states with the lowest rates of free and clear homes are places with either less affordable homes, more young households relative to older ones, or both. These are places like Washington, D.C., Maryland, Colorado, Utah, and California. So that's the end of the article. And I'd like to add, too, that I happen to know that some of those states with a lot of free and clear homes mentioned earlier, like West Virginia, Mississippi, and Louisiana, they also have low mobility rates. People in those states don't tend to move a lot. And if you stay put for a long time, it's more likely that you're going to own your home free and clear than if you're moving around a lot. Look, as you know, I think that owning a home free and clear is usually a bad idea. That's bad advice. That's outdated advice. And I'm going to reiterate why in just a moment here. But I've got to tell you about this related article, oh my gosh, that I disagree with so much. The headline of this article, it's a long headline, is "The way most Americans buy a home could be one of their biggest hurdles to getting rich," says an author who studied 10,000 millionaires. And this article will be linked in the show notes for you so you can see what I'm talking about. There's just so much wrong with this article that's published in a major online news source that you've heard of. First of all, they're making the word millionaire synonymous with being rich. Well, that doesn't make sense. Increasingly with inflation, millionaire means middle class, someone with a net worth of $1 million or euros or pounds is not rich. This oversimplified and misguided article says the 30-year mortgage is one reason most people don't become millionaires, according to a survey of 10,000 American millionaires. So they're saying, hey, we did the math here, and this math is the same oversimplified rationale you've heard before. A homeowner with a $225,000 mortgage at a 4% interest rate could save more than $87,000 in interest by opting for a 15-year fixed mortgage instead of a 30-year. To be like a millionaire, again, they're using that word in this article like it's something aspirational, and pay off your mortgage early, it recommends following a strategy that they call the purchase price paydown method. Oh my gosh, just listen to this. I almost can't believe it. The method suggests using the first 3 numbers of the purchase price, 225 in this example, to make an extra monthly principal payment. In this case, it should be $225 then. Oh, geez. This article that I disagree with goes on to say people throw away tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars on these loans without ever stopping to do the math, because according to Freddie Mac, about 90% of U.S. homebuyers opt for a 30-year mortgage. The article goes on to say, of course, there are a host of other factors like income level and spending patterns contributing to someone's ability to become a millionaire. But according to this article, the average millionaire paid off their house in 11 years, and 67% live in homes with paid off mortgages. This puts their home entirely in the asset column of their net worth and wipes their biggest debt off the liability column, is what this article says. It continues to say, on average, 1/3 of a millionaire's net worth comes from their primary residence. So if you're sitting in a paid off $350,000 home, that entire $350K counts towards your net worth. The article goes on to say, if you've got that plus $650K in retirement accounts, you're a millionaire. And it has an exclamation point at the end of the word millionaire, like that's some amazing thing. Then the article goes on to do the math, saying that in this scenario, a 15-year loan rather than a 30-year loan saves you that $87,000 in interest. Funny, the article goes on to say that the average millionaire lives in an average home. Well, no kidding. There's nothing extraordinary or aspirational about having a net worth of just $1 million. This piece wraps up by saying, yes, it really says this. The best financial move you can make is to literally move to a less expensive home. That's all for the article. I mean, my gosh, so it ends by suggesting that you now lower you and your family's quality of life, even move, which is stressful in itself. Also, you can focus on accelerating the pay down of mortgage debt that's probably at such a low interest rate today that with tax benefits, sometimes you're borrowing for less than the rate of inflation. And I'm telling you, this isn't some niche publication either. Look in the show notes if you want to see it all. They say that others aren't doing the math. I mean, gosh, you should stick with that 30-year loan. It surely has a lower monthly payment than a 15-year loan, and invest that difference. You'll almost surely be ahead more than the $87,000 in mortgage interest savings cited here. This article is classic live below your means stuff. They suggest making an extra $225 principal pay down just to pay off this ultra low interest rate debt faster. Well, that just reduced your cash flow by $225 a month in the first place. And as you know, when you make an extra principal payment like this, here's what you basically say to the bank. Hey, Mr. Banker, here's an extra $225. Don't pay me any interest on it. If I need it back, I'll pay you fees, and I'll prove to you that I qualify again. Instead, you could invest that $225 toward another property. Now you have more leverage on both your home and in a rental property that you bought at the same time. And you can create an income stream as long as the cash-on-cash return on your rental beats your primary residence interest rate in both percentage and cash amount. You do need to pay attention to that. Plus, you've got the tenant paying down your rentals loan for you. Plus, you've got more tax advantages on your home and the tax advantages on a rental. Plus, you have more debt that's outsourced to others, and you've extended your inflation profiting benefit as you get to pay back the bank down the road in debased dollars. Doing it this way also passes the velocity of money test. You're keeping your dollars moving. Paying down debt in your own home, that does not create passive income. It also doesn't even lower your mortgage payment the following month with these amortizing fixed interest rate loans. You'd still have to make the same payment amount. With debt, meaning leverage, you don't even need massive returns on your asset in order to get massive returns on the skin that you've put in the game. Early principal paydown means not only have you lost leverage in your primary residence, but that's also a dollar that cannot leverage other property. Yes, this leverage has got to be controlled with cash flows, though. This is key. Everything that I just said there, that's true even if mortgage interest rates were 8% or 10%. So even if rates are 8 or 10%, that's all true, but they're half of that. That makes this even better. I'd prefer a 100-year mortgage or an interest-only mortgage if I could get it. Now, you'd rather have $1 of equity than nothing at all, but you'd rather have $1 in nearly anything else than home equity. As you know, home equity is unsafe, illiquid, and its rate of return is always zero. How much would you invest in something that can never go up in value but only go down? Nothing. Well, that's exactly what home equity is. In fact, the most read article that I ever published anywhere in my life is the article that I wrote for Forbes just last year. It's called Why Your Return from Home Equity is Always Zero. I'll put that in the show notes in case you haven't read it before. It had about 60,000 reads the last time I saw it. Now, I think you understand that long-term leverage is more of a wealth builder for you than inflation profiting is. But now consider this. Inflation erodes both the value of your equity and the weight of your debt at the same rate. Now, you want inflation to erode your debt away. You don't want inflation to erode the value of your equity away. Well, then how do you optimize your portfolio for that effect? Well, if you have 20% equity and 80% debt, you're also better off for inflation profiting reasons than if you'd have the opposite, 80% equity and 20% debt. Again, inflation erodes away both the value of your equity, which is bad, and the weight of your debt, which is good, at the same rate. So then, this is another reason to have less equity and more debt, and you may not have thought about that before. You probably have both equity and debt on most every property that you own. The more debt that you have on it, the more inflation helps you. Again, of course, we want to conservatively tie most of our mortgage debt to cash flowing rentals where the tenant pays the debt servicing cost. That's what we're talking about here. So that's inflation, but really do it for the leverage. Think big, act big, increase your standard of living responsibly. That's what you really want to do anyway. Look, what if as a real estate investor, you had $10 million in debt? That doesn't mean minus $10 million in net worth. That means just $10 million in debt. That's a condition that I used to think sounded awful. Yes, you know what a person with $10 million of net worth is called? They're a Decamillionaire. Well, imagine if you have so much leveraged cash flowing real estate spread across diverse markets that you've got $10 million in debt. We're not talking about minus $10 million in net worth, just $10 million on the debt side of your portfolio. And no, I'm not talking about debt tied to credit cards or other consumer debt. This is what makes you what I will call a debt decamillionaire. Yes, a debt decamillionaire. You like that? $10 million in debt. So look, at 80% loan to value, you've got $10 million in debt and $12.5 million in real estate asset value. At 75% loan to value, you'd have $10 million in debt and $13.3 million in asset value. So just from your real estate, that's a positive net worth in either case. What if there were another housing calamity and the value of your portfolio were temporarily worth less than the debt amount? Well, you don't care too much. You will just hold on until it comes back. You'd hold a decade if you had to, because if you've got positive cash flow, you're still servicing that debt. This is exactly what happened to me in my real estate from 2007 to about 2010. Oppositely, what if the value of your real estate goes way up over time? Well, at 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 leverage on this portfolio, you'll have a major windfall. And whether prices go up or down, what's the effect of inflation on you, the debt decamillionaire? All this time, quietly going on in the background, with $10 million in debt at just a 3% inflation rate, that's a $300,000 tailwind on your portfolio every year. That's just the background noise. You'll have an extra $300,000 in prosperity every single year as a debt decamillionaire. That's thinking big. That's acting big. That's financial intelligence right there. Definitely not normal, but financial intelligence is not normal. You can be the debt decamillionaire, which means in most every case, you'd also be a multimillionaire with a positive net worth of several $1 million. And you'll let those positive forces of velocity, arbitrage, leverage, cash flow, and inflation all work for you. You could do all that, or instead you could grind hard and eat dirt just to pay off your $250,000 home in West Virginia or wherever over 19 years instead of 30. But what would you do then? Then you're going to start investing after that? Is that when? Geez. If you, as a debt decamillionaire, are deemed creditworthy enough by financial institutions to even get $10 million worth of good debt, well, then you must be pretty financially astute. You must be doing something right. Compared to the free and clear single-digit millionaire, you've got more options in life. You're going to have lifelong residual income streams, and they won't. You've got more choices. You've got more freedom. You've probably lived a better life. You're probably going to have more vacations. You've probably provided for a better family with more time and experiences for them because you didn't settle for status quo mediocrity. You know, people like reading articles like paying off your home mortgage early, even though it makes zero financial sense. And why is that exactly? That's because it comforts people. People feel affirmed. People want to be affirmed rather than informed. Affirmation makes people safe and small. They say we're living in the information age, but I like to say we're living in the affirmation age. It's so much easier for people to look things up on the internet that affirm them and don't disrupt them into some more aspirational level of thought or action so that they could actually make things better for themselves and those they love. They'd rather be small and lazy. To them, the debt decamillionaire concept I've just introduced might be too informative, too much information. I say seek information, not affirmation. As I'm here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame today, there's a bit of a celebration here just among us as my favorite player of all time was inducted into the hall last year. He was a class act off the field as well as on. He didn't live below his means. Brian Dawkins expanded his means. He didn't settle for mediocre. Similarly, my chat today might have you considering strategically positioning your portfolio, much like a coach positions football players on the gridiron. We'll have one more show next Monday, and then I'll be seeing you in St. Petersburg, Florida next Thursday for Get Rich Education's Tampa Real Estate Field Trip. Darren Bloomquist is back on the show with us today to discuss U.S. housing trends, the homeownership rate, the rental vacancy rate, and more. Basically, you have 4 choices in how you live, right? You can either own your home, rent your home, be homeless, or live with your parents. 4 choices, kind of. Let's talk about it. Today's guest is the Vice President of Market Economics at Auction.com. His reporting has been cited by really every major media outlet that you can think of, and he's appeared on many national network broadcasts like on ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox Business, and more. And he's really done some important work in our industry. He was editor of the Housing News Report, which was named Best Newsletter by the National Association of Real Estate Editors twice. Welcome back to Get Rich Education, Darren Bloomquist.
Thank you, Keith. Glad to be here again.
Darren is an expert at taking data and distilling it down to something very user-friendly for you, and he helps us identify trends to see where the housing market might be going so that you can make better decisions as an investor. And one of those metrics analyzed is homeownership and the homeownership rate. And why that's important to you as an income property investor is because just in general, a high home ownership rate is worse for property owners because that generally means that fewer people are renting, and a low home ownership rate is generally good for you, the investor, because that means that there are more renters. So let's give the home ownership rate some context, Darren. I'm just rounding off to the nearest whole percent for simplicity here, but from 1965 to 1995, those 3 decades, the home ownership rate kind of bounced around in this narrow range between 63% and 66%. In 2004, when we had these rather irresponsible lending practices coming to a crux and nearly anyone could get a loan, the home ownership rate went up to 69%. But then after the crash in 2016, it bottomed down to 63%. But now it got back up to about 65% or so last year. What's it doing now? Tell us about the home ownership rate in the United States.
So we had been seeing a slow but steady increase in the homeownership rate post-crisis after, as you said, it bottomed out there at just under 63%. And that had been occurring into 2018. I'm just looking here. The peak was about the fourth quarter of 2018, nearly 65%. So you're getting close, very close to that long-term average you're talking about.
Yeah.
Of as high as 66%, somewhere in that range. But what we saw in the first 2 quarters of this year was 2 straight quarters of decline. So in that homeownership rate in 2019, the first quarter, it went down from 64.8% to 64.2%. And, each tenth of a percentage point here represents probably millions of people, maybe not millions, but at least hundreds of thousands. And so that makes a big difference on demand for housing, whether that's rental housing versus owner-occupied housing. So anyway, 64.2%, and then down again in the second quarter of this year to 64.1%. That could be an indication, maybe a little bit early, that we've kind of reached that somewhere in the range of that long-term average and are settling in there. And we're not going to return to the 69, 70% home ownership rate that we were seeing during the last housing boom. That's how I'd interpret this. And I think that's actually a good thing because home ownership rates were too high. Not everybody is at the stage in life where they can and should or even would want to be a homeowner. So it seems like we're settling in around that long-term average. And if you're expecting the market to behave like it was during the last boom, then that's not happening. And so we're 7% below that peak in 2004. Overall, what stands out to me even more dramatically is when you break it down by age, the under 35 age range, they are at 36% home ownership rate this year. And that's 17% below what they were back at the peak, back in the second quarter of 2004. They were at 44%. If you look at all the age ranges that the Census Bureau looks at, they are the furthest below, closely followed by the 35 to 44 age range. So it's those, just to at rough, create broad strokes here, talking broad strokes, it's the millennials, the under 35. There's some millennials that are over 35 now that are not becoming homeowners as fast. And then also going into the Gen X a little bit, they're 14% below their peak, whereas all the other age ranges are in single digits in terms of percentages below that peak. So the biggest segment of the population this is impacting are the younger generation who are not becoming homeowners as quickly and as big in numbers as previous, particularly the generation a decade ago who were entering that age range.
Let's talk some more about the factors for this lower home ownership rate now, which means more renters proportionally. Certainly one of them, compared to 15 years ago, can be the fact that we have more stringent lending standards now than we did previously. Talk to us about some of those other factors, maybe wages not increasing proportionally to housing price increases and more.
The lending standards have remained very strong, and there isn't this policy push by the government. I think the government agencies and others, I think a lot of folks have learned their lesson, at least so far, have stuck to that lesson of not trying to push everybody into home ownership.
That's a great point because President Obama, maybe 10 years ago or so, he was offering a tax credit. I can't remember the amount exactly. It seemed like it was $8,000 to first-time home buyers, or maybe it was home buyers below a certain income level. Not a tax deduction, but an actual credit where you actually really got $8,000 for buying a home about 10 or 12 years ago.
That's right. That was actually right, I think, to spur the housing market on in the wake of the crisis. So that was a little bit of an anomaly in terms of policy pushing home ownership, but we haven't seen that continue, that those types of policies where certainly the Fannies and Freddies and FHAs of the world do want to encourage home ownership, but they're not going overboard and creating risky products or endorsing risky products in order to get people into home ownership. So that's a big factor. Then combined with what you alluded to is there's an affordability factor in many markets. It's a little bit of a difficult conundrum is because of these tighter lending standards, it does make it harder for folks to afford a home, but also wages have gone up at about an average of 2% a year since the housing bottomed out in 2012. We've seen, just looking at these numbers the other day, and we've seen about an 80% increase in home prices nationwide, and I believe about a 20% or less increase in wages nationwide since the bottom of the housing market.
That tells you a lot.
That disparity tells you a lot. It's getting, unfortunately, out of reach. But then I do think this shows up in these numbers that we're talking about. A third factor is when you break it down by age is that the younger generations coming into hitting those traditional milestones that might trigger home ownership, a desire for home ownership is not as powerful. Home ownership has lost its luster for some of those folks as well, and they're choosing not to become homeowners rather than being forced out of home ownership because they value some of the financial freedom and other freedom that comes with being a renter.
That's right. Mobility is an asset. More and more people realize that. Some people think home ownership means rent, except you get to keep it, but there's so much more to it that goes into home ownership. It's interesting. Us as real estate investors, we kind of, with qualification for mortgages, we don't want things to get too hot or too cold, because if it's a little bit easier to qualify for property, that might help us as investors because we might get to buy more property, but yet we don't want things to get too loose and easy like they were about 15 years ago with completely lax lending standards, because then tenants could leave and potentially buy a starter condo. So those are just some of the dynamics around the home ownership rate. You're listening to the show that's created more financial freedom for busy people like you than nearly any other show in the world. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. We're going to come back and talk with Darren about something that really affects you, rental vacancy rates. This is Get Rich Education.
Would you like to know the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate? This is Marco Santarelli with Norada Real Estate Investments. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those properties. We save you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit passiverealestateguide.com and get your free copy today. That's passiverealestateguide.com.
Countless property investors get killed with maintenance costs, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental properties. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, go to newconstructionturnkey.com.
This is Paradigm Life's Patrick Donahoe. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Darren Blomquist, Vice President of Market Economics at Auction.com. Darren, I know a lot of the work you do is distilling this data for rental vacancy rates, something that's obviously of extreme importance to a real estate investor. And tell us about what's happened in the latest quarter with rental vacancy rates year over year.
We're continuing to see relatively low rental vacancy rates nationwide. The rental vacancy rates in the second quarter, according to the Census Bureau, was 6.8% vacancy. That was down from 7% in the previous quarter. It was right on par with what we saw in the second quarter of 2018, that 6.8%. Really been hovering around that 6.5 to 7% range for the last several years, going back to 2014 or 2015, really. That's relatively low rental vacancy rate. And all this, along with the home ownership rate trends that we're seeing, those home ownership rates at least flattening out and even going down a little bit. This is all really good news, I would say, for investors who already own rentals, as well as those who are acquiring rentals, that you have the market forces are working in your favor. And these low vacancy rates come because the builders have not built a lot of new inventory. And so there's a limited inventory of housing relative to the number of households that have been created in the last few years. And that's pushing down these rental vacancy rates. And again, a good market force for the rental investor. We can talk about some local trends. One of the things the Census Bureau does is they break it down by whether the rentals are inside major metropolitan areas or outside.
Yeah.
One of the things that surprised me a little bit, and these quarterly numbers can go up and down a bit. There's, a little bit of noise in them, but the inside metro areas, the vacancy rate it's lower than outside metro areas. It's 6.6% versus 8.2% outside metro areas. But inside metro areas, vacancy rate was up slightly, about 2% up, whereas the outside metro areas was down 10% from a year ago. What that tells me actually more than anything is that even in outlying areas that are not maybe quite as close to jobs, we're seeing the strong rental market spread out to those as well.
Some people prefer that walkability in the inner city, and with Uber, it's perhaps easier than ever now to not own a car. Can you tell us a bit about the long-term vacancy rates over the past few decades, just so that we get some context for what today's vacancy rates are like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if we look, this data set that I'm looking at goes all the way back actually to 1956, and looking at this long-term average over time here through today, if you go back all the way to 1956, the average is 7.3% over that entire time period. So we're running slightly below that in that 6.5 to 7% range nationwide versus that 7.3% vacancy rate that we were seeing for the very long-term historical average. Interestingly, leading up to the housing bust last time around, we were seeing much higher rental vacancy rates. In 2005, 6, 7, 8, the average rental vacancy rate was 9.8%, almost 10%.
That makes sense. That's when it was so easy for people to qualify. That's a time when I was losing tenants in my apartment buildings, and they were going out and easily getting first-time homebuyer loans.
Yeah, some people could have think, that's the way as the market cycle matures, we're going to see that happen again. As of yet, we haven't. And I would say one thing with the single family rental piece of things as well is that there is that kind of plan B for investors if we do see the market shift and it is easier to become a homeowner. At least for the single family rental portion of the market, you would have another option with those homes to possibly sell them if you're struggling on the rental side.
That's a great point. Single-family homes versus apartments, each of them have so many pros and cons, but single-family homes are more liquid because you have the option to sell that single-family home to an owner-occupant, someone that's buying it and doesn't have to make sure that the numbers work, and that apartment buyer needs to make sure that the numbers work. So that high liquidity can obviously help you when it's time to get rid of your single-family home versus your apartment. Is there any data with respect to vacancy rate for single-family rentals versus apartments?
I don't know of any specific to single family. Yeah, this rental vacancy rate is overall. And when you look at the only kind of implicit data, I guess I'd call it, that we have in the census data is it does have suburbs versus cities. And you tend to think this is definitely not true across the board. The suburbs would have a higher concentration of single family homes as rentals. And the suburban vacancy rate is lower. It's 6.2% versus 7% inside cities. And that's different than inside metro areas, as I was talking about before. It's distilling basically urban versus suburban. So that's one thing you could look at. But yeah, that there's not any data that at least I look at and know of that distills it down for the single family rentals markets. But I do have this broken down, just an interesting tidbit that really surprised me when it's broken down by the top 75 metro areas in the country. The lowest vacancy rate in the country, at least in the second quarter of 2019, was Cleveland, Ohio, believe it or not, 1.5%. And that was below even San Jose, which is a very traditionally market that has very little inventory. And so that was a surprise. Columbus, Ohio was in the bottom 5 in terms of lowest vacancy rates as well. Allentown, Pennsylvania as well. Those are those markets, that sweet combination of lower price properties to acquire traditionally. And then if you throw in that low vacancy rate, that's a really good mix for those areas.
Yeah, that's right. And I would not have expected some of that. Darren, any last things a real estate investor should keep in mind this year with regard to housing trends?
We're seeing a market that is slowing, but slowing in a good way. It's behaving rationally. And so we are seeing home price appreciation slow down, but it's not based on this severe imbalance in the market, I don't think. It's based on the market responding to some affordability challenges and slowing down. And we're seeing home ownership kind of even out and balance out and not continue to go up, which I think is a good thing, and return to the long-term norms. And these are all good things. I think if any investment strategy that is banking too much on appreciation, I would caution against. But a strategy that's looking at the fundamentals of a market for cash flow, even if home price appreciation in that market does pull back a little bit, you're still in a really good spot.
Yeah, hopefully we're getting into an environment of sustainability. That might be one way to think about it.
Yep, absolutely. Sustainable growth. It may be slower growth, but it's sustainable, I think, is a good thing. The markets in the Midwest and the South, that's their typical MO.
Yeah.
And so that they're used to that. There's been a few that have broken out of that pattern, and those actually concern me a little bit. Some of the markets that have become, we're seeing price growth that is double digits as opposed to single digit growth. In some of the Midwestern markets, that's actually a little bit of a warning flag to me. But where you see population growth, where you see job growth, where you see home ownership rates that are not continuing to accelerate higher, and rental vacancy rates, those are some of the key metrics that you can say, well, that's a market. If it has all those elements, it's a really good one for buying cash flow rentals.
Well, Darren, it's been great to get an update on the latest market statistics. Let our listeners know where they can learn more about you and your work.
Sure. If you just go to our website, auction.com, and then go to In the News, just / In the News, you'll find my work there with a lot of the heat maps and other graphics that I create to try to simplify a lot of the data that I'm looking at. And of course, you can explore the rest of the auction.com site. We have tens of thousands of properties at any given time that are available for auction across the country.
Darren Bloomquist, it's been great having you back on the show.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, great stuff from Darren. He really stays on top of the trends. A quick summary here. The home ownership rate has dropped dramatically among those below age 35. There are low rental vacancy rates nationwide, 6.8%. Another way to say that is that there's high occupancy, and there is higher occupancy inside metro areas, especially. Of course, these are national trends, and all real estate is local. I hope that you like my concept of the debt Decamillionaire today in helping you better understand how to think and act bigger. I've got an announcement about GREturnkey.com if you're looking for leverage on cash flowing real estate. That is, we're now featuring the Huntsville, Alabama market on that page, our newest provider. Huntsville has an MSA population of almost 500,000 people. Rent to price ratios work, and they work even better in Alabama because their property taxes are some of the lowest in the nation. Get the report and connect with the provider at getricheducation.com/Huntsville. That's getricheducation.com/Huntsville. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.